Today we're going to be talking about depth of field. Depth of field is a really hard concept for me to talk about in a classroom with just a whiteboard. You kind of have to see it to understand it. So I put together this video so that we can see what depth of field means and how we can use it in our videos. All right, to demonstrate today's topic about depth of field, we're going to be using two different cameras. We're going to be using our good friend, the iPhone. In this case, it's an iPhone 12 Max, so we've got the best iPhone we can get to compare things with. And it does the wonderful job we're used to seeing these cameras do. On your right, we have a Canon EOS 90D, this is a photography camera, so it's a body for taking pictures. And I've got on it a cinema lens. This is a lens for movies. And I'll get into that a little bit later. But the idea here is that this particular piece of big glass can do things that this little tiny bit of lens here, this little lens here, really can't do. And that's change depth of field. Now, if you want to use these kinds of lenses, you really have two choices and two kinds of equipment. Equipment like this, which is a still camera that can do some video. These kinds of equipment cost a couple $100 for the camera body. There's no lens there. That's just the camera body. Up to a couple $1,000s for a really nice one. I mean, you can go ridiculous and spend over $5,000 for just the camera body if that's what you want. And they come in really two varieties these days. This is a digital SLR, which is really good at taking pictures. And then there's a thing called a mirrorless camera, which is more like an iPhone with better sensors. They're really expensive. There's another kind of camera that you can use this kind of glass with, and that's a cinema camera. So it's a camera designed to take video. And those cameras can do a little bit more with video, and they cost a little more. A low-end a cinema camera is a couple $1,000s. There's a really nice one for $18,000. And the ones that you see on TV all the time, those cinema cameras are about $50,000 for the camera, just the camera body. You don't have a lens on it yet. So that's kind of a high-end deal. That's why we try and get as much as we can out of our iPhones. Our iPhones don't cost anywhere near as much, and they actually do more for us than a camera like this. For example, this is getting the feed to us using the network, which is what we like using. This camera, we have to take basically an HDMI feed from the camera, convert it into video, and put it into our computer. But anyway, there we are. Those are the two things we're going to be using today to demonstrate depth of field. You're seeing me right now with a short depth of field using the Canon camera. And I've set the field length to be short. So I'm fairly sharp. I didn't probably do the best job focusing, but the things behind me are not. Things are fuzzy. So you look out that window and you can hardly see that there's trees there. The things behind me, it's a noisy background, and it's kind of fuzzy. Compare that with, let's look at what the iPhone sees. The iPhone has a very long depth of field. And we'll get into why that is in a minute, but you can see everything's crisp. The window, you can see out the window, you can see what's going on, you can see all the things around, see all the junk in this room. And if nothing's fuzzy, nothing's really holding your attention except, maybe because I'm moving my hands, you see me. Okay, so on the front of the Canon is a lens like this. It has two rings. This is the focus ring on the outside. There are two rings on this lens. The front ring is the focal ring. So if I want to move the focal plane to the back, I move the ring to the left. See? That thing in the back comes into focus. If I want to move the focal length forward, I move it to the right. And so we pass that guy and come into the thing on the right. And this is the f-stop ring, or the size of the aperture. Let's just take a quick look at that. So this is the f-stop set as big as it can be, and then I simply, if I move this to here, you see that it gets smaller, and that's 22, f22, and this is f1.5. Okay, let's talk about f-stop for a second. So this goes from f1.5 to f22. The way you need to think about this is the smaller the number, the bigger the hole. The bigger the number, the smaller the hole. And that's because f-stop is really this ratio. So if you have 1 over 1.5, that's a bigger number than 1 over 1 over 22, which is a very, very small number. So that's how you can think of it. Just the easiest way to think about it is small number, big hole, big number, small hole. And that makes the hole. Now what happens with the f-stop is that when you have a small number, a big hole, the depth of field is very short. Okay, again, here I am at 1.5. The hole is really big. Lots of light is coming into the sensor, and we have a very short depth of field. Let's change it to 10. Okay, so we've crisped things up. We've extended the depth of field. We're now at 10. It's probably about the best we can do in the light in here. What happens is that as that hole gets smaller, you get less light in. The depth of field gets longer. And without extra lights and studio lights, which I don't want to break out, let's see if we can get out to 22 and see what happens with f22. So here we are, f22, very, very small, the smallest hole in this lens, the longest depth of field we can get, and everything should be sharp as a tack all around us. Let's go back to something else. Okay, so right now we're at f5.6. It's one of those standard sort of f-stops. It gets used a lot. Looking at the metadata from the iPhone, it looks like it's shooting at 5.6 almost all the time. So this picture and the picture from the iPhone should be very close to each other. Let's put them side by side and see what they look like. Okay, so here they are side by side. I think they do look pretty close to each other. Now, the iPhone will switch depending on which lens it has, what the f-stop is. It never gets much below 5, certainly never below 3 that I've ever seen it do. So that's what it does. So this should be pretty close to the same f-stop. So we're at f2 on the Canon, so things should be fairly nicely fuzzed out behind me, not radically fuzzed out like the 1.5 was, and it should look pretty good. So compare and contrast the iPhone with the Canon. So here we are at f2.0. I like this. This is one of my favorites. But you're going to be saying to me, hey, you know, we like that fuzziness behind us. We like how that looks. But is there a way that we can do that with our iPhones? Do we really have to drag around this heavy, expensive gear to get this look? Also, before I go there, let me just point out that using the Canon for this is time-consuming. You have to manually focus this stuff. You have to manually decide what your aperture is going to be. Now, the Canon's doing a pretty good job today about figuring out how to compensate for the light differences. I'm actually kind of pleased with that. But you still have to do a lot of focusing. That's why I have this little target here. Since I'm here by myself, I focus on the target. And since I'm standing in the same plane of focus, the focal plane that the target's in, I get a pretty good idea that I'm going to be mostly in focus within a couple of feet, and that the stuff behind me will be fuzzy. That takes a lot of time. Messing with these cameras this way takes a lot of time. Now, professional can do this, you know, very easily. Those of us who do it sometimes, this can be a kind of daunting task to be doing manually focusing and manually deciding what your depth of field is going to be. So that's that. Now on to, can we get this effect using just an iPhone? Can we somehow figure out how to make this depth of field thing happen? Let's give it a shot. All right, so we're going to try this with the iPhone two ways. The first way we're going to do it is in post-production. DaVinci Resolve 17 Studio, not the free version, the studio version, has this thing called Magic Mask. You basically draw a line on your person, and that makes a mask. You can take that mask and exclude the mask, so everything around it would be part of the function, and that function that you'd apply would be to blur it. That's all you're doing is blurring it. So let's see how that looks. Does that look okay? Yeah, it kind of sort of does, and it's useful. It's not real depth of field because everything except me is out of focus. And it's out of focus the same amount. If you remember the Canon, things were out of focus sort of naturally. But if you had a really short thing to do, and you wanted to spend $299 for DaVinci Studio, or if you already had it, versus, you know, a couple of $1,000 for a decent camera and some good lenses, this isn't a bad choice for us. Okay, so right now I'm using a different program to record the video. I'm using something called Mavis, which gives me a great deal of precision about where the focal plane is. What I really mean is that it gives you a place where the focal plane starts. So from me to the camera is mostly in focus. The things behind me mostly aren't in focus. It's not like the big glass where you can really set an area, but it gives you some sort of fake way of doing some of this stuff that still is using optics, and it's better than doing it sometimes post-production where there's a lot of work involved, a lot of compute power involved. So this does work. It's something you can use, but notice that what I really got going on here, you can see some of the controls from Mavis on the screen, right over here and over here. Those are because Mavis records to the hard drive on the iPhone. It doesn't send out NDI yet. So what I've got is I've got an NDI capture program running on the phone, and it's sending it out over the Ethernet here to my computer. So it's not quite as handy as our NDI phone, and it's not quite as handy as using the Canon, but it is a stopgap that we can use to get, if you want something that sort of simulates a depth of field, you can bring the subject in close, the actor in close, set yourself to using the 2x camera, which is or lens, which is the best lens on the iPhone for doing any sort of depth of field stuff, and then off you go. Okay, so this concludes our topic on depth of field and how to adjust the depth of field using optics. And we've looked at a couple of solutions of using other tools to get a simulation of a depth of field. And why are we talking about this right now? One, it's fun. It's fun to learn about new stuff, about cameras and how they work. It's fun to learn about optics. But if you look ahead in our script that we're working on right now, if you look at scene 6, scene 6 has 3 students lined up, 1, 2, 3, a couple of feet apart. And in the background, we have this Steve character who'll be wearing yellow, I'm sure. I don't want him to be in focus. And I really don't want a whole lot of other things in focus in that shot. That shot's particularly lined up to take complete advantage of doing depth of field work. So when we get to that point, we start filming that, I'll be bringing the Canon in, and we'll be looking at how we can change depth of field and get the right shot for this. It ought to be a lot of fun. Hopefully everyone get a chance to play with it. So anyhow, that's what we're all about today. Hopefully you learn stuff, because learning is fun, and especially learning about cameras and stuff. All right, well, have a great day. Take care. Bye.